Hello, my name is Jared. Do you know who was the first person to set foot on the moon? Don't you know? What about the secret of the moon? Have you never heard of it? That's great! Today you'll discover the secret of the moon and learn about the first person to go on the surface by reading The Secret on the Moon. So let's read it together. Meet the characters. Grandpa, Ben and Royce's grandfather, a scientist and inventor. Clank, Grandpa's robot. Ben, Royce's brother. Rosie, Ben's sister. Alice, Royce's friend. Tom, an astronaut who flies to the moon. Mike, another astronaut. Years ago, two astronauts landed on the moon, but they found that they were not alone. Who was hiding and watching them? Read The Secret on the Moon and find out. Chapter 1. Ben, what are you doing? Asked Rosie. Ben looked up from his work. I have to do some homework, he said. We're learning about the moon in class. Rosie's friend Alice putting on one of the photos on Ben's computer. It showed an astronaut on the surface of the moon. Just think, said Alice. How did the astronauts feel when they stood on the moon? Ben smiled. I've been looking on the website about that, he said. Some people think that astronauts never landed on the moon. They said that the photos were taken on Earth. What? Grandpa was at the door. When astronauts landed on the moon, it was a very important moment in history. People should be proud of it. Grandpa charged. Clank, he said. Come here, please. Yes, said Clank. I was watching TV. There's no time for that, said Grandpa. I want you to take Ben, Rosie, and Alice on a trip. I want you to take them to the moon. Brilliant, said Ben and Rosie. Alice smiled, but she was worried. As the children were leaving, Grandpa spoke quietly to Clank. I can come with you on this trip, he said, but there's something very important that you have to do. What's very important? Yes. 5 minutes later, the children were all waiting in the van. Are you ready? Asked Clank. Yes. Clank started the van and suddenly there were bright lights all around them. The lights went round and round, faster and faster, and then a tunnel appeared in the middle. Clank drove the van straight into the tunnel. Whoosh! Seconds later, the van flew out the other end. We're in space, said Rosie. Ben looked out the window. We've never been so far from Earth or so close to the moon. They could see the many craters on the moon's surface from here. We haven't just traveled in space, said Clank. We've traveled in time too. Are we in the future? Asked Alice. No, said Clank. We've gone back into the past to the time of one of the early landings on the moon. Grandpa wants you to say. Chapter 2. A few days later, the van was on the moon. It's so empty here, said Alice. Ben agreed. The surface of the moon was as empty as a desert, with only gray dust and rocks and the darkness of space above. Do you want to go outside? Clank asked. We have 2 spacesuits in the van. Only 2? said Ben. That's okay, said Alice nervously. I prefer to stay in the van. When Ben and Rosie were wearing the spacesuits, they moved to the back of the van. One door closed behind them, and a second door opened in front of them. It was time to walk on the moon. This is amazing a moment, said Ben on the radio in his helmet. We should see something important. You're right, said Rosie, and she jumped onto the moon. Let's go. Don't go too far, Clank told them on the radio. The astronauts are going to land soon. They mustn't see us. Why not? Asked Rosie. If the astronauts see us here on the moon, it will change history, answered Ben. Is that bad? Asked Rosie. Yes, said Ben. Terrible. If it changed something very important in the past, it might change everything in our time. Don't worry, said Clank on the radio. They won't see us if we stay here. Rosie began to play and jump around. This is fun, she said. She jumped up very high. Wow, gravity on the moon is just weaker than on Earth. Ben laughed. You can jump 6 times higher. Ben had brought a baseball with him. I want to try this. Watch, you can throw things 6 times further here too. He pulled back his arm and threw the baseball. It went a long, long way. I've never thrown anything so far in my life, said Ben proudly. But Rosie was worried. Wait, she said. Heard the Clank say that The astronauts are going to land. Ben's smile disappeared. Oh no, Ben, he said. I threw the bow in that direction. What if the astronauts ever on this part of the moon find a baseball with my name on it? Chapter 3. Ben started to move in the direction of the baseball. He couldn't run easily, so he had to move by jumping. I must get that ball before the astronauts arrive, he said. Wait, said Rosie, I'll come with you. In the van, Con was surprised when she saw Ben and Rosie. What are you doing? He asked them over the radio. You can't go that way. It's almost time for the astronauts to arrive. We have to stay behind in this big rock so they won't be able to see us. Ben quickly explained the problem to Clunk. We should use the van to get Ben and Rosie and the baseball, said Alice. That's probably the quickest way. But before the Clunk could start the van, there was a flash of light in the darkness of space above them. We're too late, said Clunk. That light is the astronauts' landing vehicle. It's flying down to the surface while the bigger part of the rock orbits the moon. The light got bigger and bigger. The landing vehicle was coming closer. Ben and Rosie, said Clunk on the radio, you must let the astronauts see you. They have a camera that sends pictures down to Earth. If they see you here on the moon, millions of people on Earth will see you too. Ben and Rosie could also see the light of the landing vehicle. There was no time for them to go back to the van. What can we do? Asked Rosie. Here, said Ben. He jumped into a small crater. We can hide in here. What now? Asked Rosie. We'll just have to wait, said Ben. He put his head out of the crater a little. The landing vehicle was coming down, lower and lower. Clouds of dust from the moon went up. At last, the landing vehicle landed. It was on the moon. Ben knew that he was watching an important moment in history, but he couldn't enjoy it. There were two big scary questions in his mind. Were the astronauts going to find the baseball? And if they found it, what would happen then? Chapter 4. A door on the landing vehicle opened. There's a camera on that door, Ben told his sister. It's going to film the first astronaut when it leaves the vehicle. A few minutes later, an astronaut appeared and began to climb slowly down the ladder. When the astronaut was on the moon, he put a second camera in front of the vehicle. Pictures from that camera are being sent to a satellite and then to TVs around the world, Ben told Rosie. The second astronaut came down the ladder. After a few minutes, the two astronauts began to collect dust and small rocks. They're going to take those home to Earth for scientists to study, explained Ben. Ben and Rosie watched for a long time. They can't stay out of the landing vehicle so much longer, said Ben. Those old spaceships don't have a lot of air. Maybe they won't see the baseball, said Rosie. Hope began to grow inside Ben when one of the two astronauts started to climb back up the ladder. But the other astronaut didn't follow him. He was looking at something to one side of the vehicle. Clunk, what shall we do? Asked Rosie over the radio. You're going to see the ball. Before Clunk could answer, Grandpa's face appeared on the computer screen in front of him. Clunk, I recorded this message for you. You must do everything that I tell you. What's happening? Said Alice. I'm not sure, said Clunk. You must leave Ben and Rosie here and take the van to Earth right now, said Grandpa. Listen very carefully. We can't leave Rosie and Ben here, shouted Alice. But Clunk had started the van and they were already leaving. Clunk, what are you doing? Where are you going? Rosie said into her radio. There's no answer. Rosie was starting to feel afraid. Ben was afraid too. The astronaut was moving closer to the baseball. He was probably asking himself why this rock has much rounder than all the others. Then he stopped. He could see now that this wasn't a moon rock. He reached down carefully and picked the ball up. He held it in his hand and studied it. Ben watched nervously. What was the astronaut thinking now? Chapter 5. The astronaut, whose name was Tom, looked at the baseball in his hand for a long time. Tom had trained for years. He had dreamed of walking on the moon. He had thought that he was ready for anything. He was wrong. The name Ben was written on the baseball in blue ink. How? Tom thought. How could there be a baseball here? Was this really happening? Was he dreaming? Tom felt suddenly afraid and ran from home. It was harder and harder for him to breathe. He turned and started to run back to the landing vehicle. As Tom ran, he forgot to look down. One of his feet hit a log and fell. Ben and Rosie watched nervously. "Is he okay?" asked Rosie. "He isn't getting up." Ben said nothing. Had the astronaut hit his head inside his helmet? Or maybe there wasn't enough air in space now. Weren't the other astronaut came out and looked for him? Asked Rosie. "He can't," said Ben. "Those old spacesuits don't have enough air. We have to help him. If we don't, he might die." But if they helped him, millions of people on Earth would see that. Kong and Alice were still in the van. Why have we come back to Earth?" asked Alice. "We have to go back to the moon and get Ben and Rosie." The van had arrived outside a small house in the countryside. Behind the house there was a small shed. "Don't worry, Alice," Kong said. "Grandpa explained what we have to do." He knocked on the shed door. A tall teenager with big glasses opened the door. "Hello, Richard," said Kong. "Please don't be afraid." The teenager looked more amazed than afraid. "A robot?" he said. "How wonderful!" Richard smiled. "Can I look inside your head?" he asked Kong excitedly. "I'm very interested in robots." "There's no time," said Kong. "Why, what do you know about the moon landing?" "Everything," said Richard. He pointed to a black and white TV inside the shed. "I've been watching it while I work." "We need your help," said Kong. He told the teenager what he wanted him to do. "I can't do that," said Richard. "If you don't, one of those astronauts is going to die," said Alice. "Okay," said Richard immediately. "I will help." Chapter 6. Richard worked quickly. Soon he built a new machine from the many parts in his shed. "This will have the signal from the moon," he said. "Nobody will see what's happening there for about a few minutes." "Is that long enough?" "I hope so," said Alice. Richard turned on the machine. All around the world, people were watching live pictures from the moon. They'd seen one astronaut as he returned the landing vehicle, but where was the second astronaut? Suddenly, the picture stopped. Everywhere, people were asking the same question. What happened? On the moon, Ben and Rosie had reached the astronauts. Ben put his hands under the man's arms. "You take his feet," he told Rosie. "We'll have to carry him." "What about the camera?" asked Rosie. Then she noticed something. The camera's red light was off. "Look, Ben," she said. "I don't think that the camera is sending any pictures to Earth now. Perhaps Kong did something to it," said Ben. Slowly, they carried the astronauts to the landing vehicle. "What now?" asked Rosie. Ben thought about this. "We should knock on the door." A few minutes later, the children and the two astronauts were inside the landing vehicle. I can't believe this," said the second astronaut, whose name was Mike. He looked confused and afraid. Tom was starting to open his eyes. Are you really here?" he asked when he saw the two children. "They're real," said Mike. "And they saved your life, Tom." "I don't understand any of this," said Tom. He looked at Ben and Rosie. "But thank you. Now please explain why and how you're here," said Mike. Grandpa had always told the children not to tell anybody about the band, but Ben knew that he couldn't lie to these astronauts. "We've come from the future," he said. "What?" Tom and Mike looked surprised. "Can everybody in the future travel back in time?" Tom asked. "No," said Rosie. "Only our grandpa." She quickly explained how they had come to the moon. Tom listened carefully. Then he said, "People on Earth call Mike and me brave because we came to the moon. But you two young people are just as brave as we are." Chapter 7. Alice nervously looked for the black TV screen to Richard's machine and back again. The 10 minutes were almost over. What's happening on the moon? She thought. Will I ever see my friends again? Suddenly there was a loud sound from outside. A helicopter was landing. Clunk moved to the door. We have to leave before anyone sees us. But it was too late. The shed door opened and a tall man with glasses was looking at them. Nobody is going anywhere until I know what's happening, he said. The man's name was Professor Miller, and he was the head of the space program. When the signal from the moon stopped, we looked for the problem, he said. We found out that it was coming from this space. Alice, Clunk, and Richard knew that they could not lie. They explained everything. They were amazed that Professor Miller believed them. Nobody else can ever know about this, Miller said. Am I in trouble? Asked Richard. No, Miller smiled. You're a brilliant young man. I want to give you a job in the space program. On the moon, Ben gave the baseball to Tom. Keep this to remember us, he said. Tom's last words to them were goodbye and good luck. Then Ben and Rosie went outside the landing vehicle again. Seconds after the children walked away from the landing vehicle, the camera's red light came out again. Soon, it was time for the landing vehicle to take off. It was the start of the astronauts' long journey back to Earth. Ben and Rosie watched as the vehicle grew smaller and smaller. But where were Clunk and Alice? Where was the van? Ben and Rosie were alone. The moon moved through space, and suddenly they saw the Earth. It was a beautiful blue ball in the darkness of space. Earth looked different from the dead gray love of the moon. Ben and Rosie knew that it was full of life with plants and animals, seas and ooze, rain snow and lovely blue skies. And there were people, millions of them, cities and towns full of people. I want to go home, said Rosie. Me too, said Ben quietly. Chapter 8. Ben didn't know how long they sat here. He was getting more and more worried. How much air did they have in their spacesuit now? If Clunk didn't come back soon, the trip was going to become very dangerous. Suddenly, Rosie said, What's that? Something far away was moving across the surface of the moon. Its colors were bright and beautiful in its dead gray place. It was Grandpa's van, and it was coming to get them. Soon they could see Clunk and Alice's faces inside the van. We're going home, said Rosie happily. When they arrived back outside their house, Ben and Rosie looked around at the sky above them and the green grass under their feet. Birds were singing, and they could feel the wind on their faces. It felt wonderful. Earth, said Rosie. What a fantastic place! A face appeared at the open window. It was Grandpa. He looked happy to see the children. Quick, he said. Come here. There's someone that I want you to meet. He's an old friend. An old man was sitting inside. His hair was gray and there were lines on his face, but Ben and Rosie recognized him immediately. It was Tom, the astronaut. I've waited many years to see you again, he told Ben and Rosie. When Mike and I came home, Professor Miller talked to us. He asked us never to tell anybody about you. Nobody else ever knew what really happened on the moon that day. It's been our secret all these years. He pulled something from his pocket and smiled. This is yours, Ben. I've had it for a long, long time. It was the baseball. Rosie was looking at a photo on the wall. It showed Grandpa when he was a young man. He was standing with a tall man who wore glasses, Professor Miller. Wait a minute, said Rosie. One other person knew about what happened. Richard. He turned to Grandpa. Were you the teenager who helped us? Yes, Grandpa smiled. That's why I didn't go on this trip. I didn't want to change history by admitting myself in the past. Ben was standing at the window. Look, he said, the moon's beautiful this evening. Well, have you ever been to the moon? I want to go to the moon in Ben's grandpa's band. I really don't understand why Ben took a baseball to the moon. Tom was dangerous because of that baseball. Thank you for listening to my reading. I hope you get to the moon too. Thank you. This is Spin Giraffe. Bye bye.